Seven Stars of Midnight, written by R.E. Joyce, narrated by Vanessa Brooks. Copyright 2018 through 2020 by William C. Joyce III. Production copyright by William C. Joyce III. Book 1. Those of the Arrows. Synopsis. Seven Stars of Midnight is an epic fantasy thriller centered on a world at the brink of darkness. The forces of evil, festering for centuries, erupt, and 7 heroes are called to save the world and rebuild the goodness of the earth. Gathered together from all parts of the known world, our heroes lay their individual desires aside to become part of the adventure, and by doing so, build something new and worthy of praise. Wars come and go, but heroes last forever in the hearts of those they serve. Book 1, Chapter 1. The Journey Begun.
As each moment of life is experienced, the level of conscious involvement will determine the lasting effect of the particular moment.
Kraylong. Jawab moved effortlessly through the intricate dance of the tonla, her long black hair braided and tied down with a black silk strap. Her blouse, jacket, and leggings made of soft deerskin dyed black absorbed the moonlight and helped her blend into the night. Dull black boots made of sturdier leather moved through the intricate patterns. Standing 5 foot 4 inches, her slender body belied the strength and agility she possessed. She used all her skills to keep the muscles of her face still and impassive, concentrating on the dance. The crisp, clean mountain air, alive with the full moon's piercing silver light, filled the clearing. Jawab stretched her arms towards the silver moon and drank in the cool air. For a fleeting moment, Earth and humanity united in her dance. After the night of peace and reflection, Jawab walked silently through the forest, west of the mountain clearing under the morning star. It had been many days and nights since she first felt the dread of her journey holding down her spirit. As a young, tolling girl, Jawab had grown up in the peaceful seacoast mountains and enjoyed youth, family, and fellowship with her god Tolas. She entered the priesthood with the pleasant knowledge of contentment and fullness of life. Her world, now engulfed in the bitterness of civil war, tore towns, villages, and even families apart. An answer to the violence that moved her people towards utter destruction needed to be found. Jawab thought back to the storm-whipped night the high priest of Tolas came to her with his impossible mission. Having taken the solemn vows to the teachings of Tolas, Jawab would obey any command given by the high priest. Having studied under his gentle tutelage, she would have given her life to follow him, and now he asked her to forsake her vows and return to the world. He asked her to give up her peace and find those to help save the eroding tranquility of the world of tolling. It still amazed her that Kraylong, her high priest, asked her to volunteer. It still stung her very soul that she wanted to refuse. These painful memories had stolen Jawab's peace during her journey across the misty mountains and into the first valley of the west. Not until the evening before had she finally accepted her mission. The tonla had put her back in focus with the whole of her life, and in reflection, she accepted her task. Jawab understood that by taking the mission, she gave up her right to return to her monastery from the unholy world she now entered. The western world spread before Jawab. The journey over the mountains that surrounded her small country held breathtaking beauty she had not known. Now she looked out over a vast new world that defied comprehension. Her journey took a simple route: travel west to the Iron Mountain Range, beyond the misty mountains, and then seek out the Master of the Eagles. He would be the one to aid her people if any help could be found. Tibor. As she walked her way down the rocky slopes of the misty mountain forests, she set her mind to the task of her journey. In this frame of concentration, she nearly missed the warning signs. Coming to an immediate stop, she crouched and slowly reached into her jacket for her Krylo. Although a ceremonial knife, the Krylo was a well-forged weapon. With this and her skills, Joab was ready for whatever danger that approached. Staring up, she beheld the jet-black cat with piercing green eyes. Joab thought about the ease with which the beast had approached her, yet it too stood stone still watching her. Its muscles taut and quivering, prepared for battle. The cat seemed to await her decision. "So, Devil of the Mountain, you have come to test your prowess on me. You will soon find out that you are not superior to all humans." Joab spoke softly, content on watching and feeling the cat's reaction to her presence. The beautiful animal seemed to listen to her words. She straightened her stance and placed the Krylo back in its carved bamboo casing. The cat would not attack. This she felt rather than knew. A sense of oneness between the two existed that Joab accepted without understanding. "I will let you travel your road of destiny, cat. You and I will not test our strength because we both have our quests to accomplish." Moving slowly but without fear, Joab turned and walked on towards the west. Joab felt the cat's presence on the trail above her path and knew he followed at a comfortable distance. Joab, reaching a glade, looked around for signs of other travelers. The glade seemed empty, but indications of some presence within the recent past brought Joab to attention. A swift stream bounded the meadow to the south, and the mountain cliff crowded it to the north. Her only path was to cross the valley and continue down through the forest on the other side. With caution, she began to cross the open area. The grass, knee-high, soft and browning in the autumn sunlight, belied a peacefulness that Joab knew did not exist this day. Something was very wrong. Halfway across, the serpents lifted high out of the grass, showing themselves and their evil intentions. One giant cobra would be no problem for Joab. 2 would prove difficult. 4 brought the reality of death to the traveler from tolling. Quickly stepping back, Joab drew her Krylo and dispatched the cobra directly behind her. This gave her a moment to think and prepare. The other 3, seeing her swift movements, approached with greater caution. She knew they would strike together. Eyeing the 3, she chose the one in front, larger than the others, to be the master cobra. The one to her left, the youngest, may lack experience and skill. The one on her right showed no signs of weakness. The snakes were less than 10 feet from her when she sensed the presence of another in the glade. As if by reflex, she knew what her actions would be. Rolling to her left, she dispatched the younger snake before the others reacted. With the same movement, she let her Krylo fly, striking the master cobra in mid-strike. Her life was now in the hands of another. Glancing to her right, she saw the black streak of the big cat deftly snatching the cobra from the air. Its teeth sank into the neck of the snake. With a quick flick of its head, the snake fell limp and lifeless in its jaw. They stood close, their eyes locked and focused on the inner soul of the other. Joab knew that 2 travelers from separate worlds were now joined together for their journey. "I see, cat, that we are to become friends. You will join me on my quest." She felt strange talking to the animal, and yet knew he understood, knew he would follow her and aid her on her journey. It felt good to have such a companion. "I will call you Tibor, Lord of the Great Cats. The name is befitting your prowess. I am Joab. If we are to travel together, then let us go on in a manner suiting us both." With this, Joab turned and began to run across the remainder of the glade. She could maintain this pace through the day and far into the night. It felt good to stretch out her muscles and push the limits of her endurance. She also knew Tibor would follow. His graceful stride matched hers as they entered the forest below and began their quick descent through the foothills of the misting mountains into the valley of Elson. Book 2, Those of the Sword. Book 2, Chapter 1, Arden's Journey. A cold mist drifted across the fallow fields as Arden placed the last of the farm tools against the barn wall. The work completed and the farm ready for its winter rest, Arden stood, tall and sturdy from years of farming. Handsome of face and well-tanned by the sun, Arden had grown into a man. He had maintained a peaceful demeanor for many years, but inside he yearned for something he could not identify. As Arden looked across the field, he felt as if he were part of another time and place. The world before him was that of his childhood. His decision made him look closely at the land he had grown to love. The stars held on to their last chance of adorning the skies as the sun began to push away the darkness. The cycle of the farm moved ever forward, yet not the life Arden would choose for himself. His grandfather's tales of adventure and the mysteries surrounding Arden's family had made his decision. That, and the old man's warning of trouble in the kingdom. The passing of his beloved mother in the early spring made the decision easy. Without looking back, Arden led the mule with his provisions and walked out of the west gate following the morning stars on their journey across the sky. Arden thought once again of his last encounter with the old man. The old man. He was peculiar and yet very familiar. A man no one knew, yet he seemed to have been around forever. His quiet, almost peaceful manners gave you an immediate sense of well-being. He had approached the house through the fields from the north. Not many travelers came from there due to the rise in trolls and ogres in the foothills of the Crystal Mountains. The people of the Crystal Valley stayed away from the mountains and did not like to meet strangers who would travel in such a country. He approached the cottage porch without a word, drew up a chair, and sat down to fill his pipe. Even the dogs remained quiet and calm.
Arden, you knew from the time of childhood dreams that I would come. The destiny of your ancestors lives within you. Now the time has come for you to act.
Arden walked into the cottage, knowing the old man would follow as he chose. He fixed the evening meal of rabbit stew and biscuits for two, waiting quietly for the old man to approach and begin his story. He felt again the same excitement nestled in his grandfather's lap, listening to the tales of his family's great deeds in the time of the Dragon Lords at the beginning of time. The old man ate in silence and, lighting his pipe, seemed to fall asleep, disinterested in Arden's curiosity. The memories of the stories played through Arden's head. In the beginning, the Dragon Lords ruled the land from the great western sea to the distant eastern oceans. They were ruthless and cruel, using the people for both slaves and food. Then there came a man who refused to work for the Lords and banded together with others, running off to the Crystal Mountains. There they began to build a new life and new freedom. It was many years before the Dragon Lords found out about these new people, and many more before they chose to do anything about them. Then, in the time of Arden's great-great-great-grandfather, the dragons came, the mountain homes destroyed, and the people scattered. Many died, and many more captured and brought back to slavery. The Dragon Lord Wars began, and Arden's ancestors fought for freedom. There, in the Crystal Mountains, they learned to fight, and, with help of the dwarves and the elves, the great sword of darkness was forged along with the arrows of midnight. The old man spoke, breaking through Arden's wandering thoughts.
Now you know what it is you must do. Find the sword of darkness.
Reeling as if from a blow, Arden asked the man to explain what he meant.
You are talking about tales told by old men too feeble to plow the soil. They would spin fables for young children to remember into the long night of sleep. And how did you know my thoughts? Who are you?
The pipe relit, and the gray beard drooped as the old man fell back into his apparent slumber. The ancient dwarves during the Dragonlord Wars had forged the Sword of Darkness deep in the Crystal Mountain. A giant had carried it into battle and wielded death and destruction the Dragonlords had never felt before. There were indeed many other weapons and men in the battle, but never before had anyone stood face to face with a Dragonlord and lived, much less defeated the dragon at its own game of destruction. The Dragonlords, young and old, perished in battle. They fell either by the arrows of midnight, crafted with elven magic, or at the hands of the Sword of Darkness. The giant, a gentle soul, turned from the battle and moved off to the west, never to be seen again. It is said that far to the west in the Valley of the Winds, a mountain has grown over the giant, and the sword to protect it from the hands of evil. Again, the stare and the old man spoke.
Seek out this sword. Your people need it again. The evil of years past is upon the land again.
At this, the old man rose and walked towards the door.
Wait,
Arden cried.
how will I know what to do? How will I find this mountain? Why should I believe you and your mystic ways? Who are you?
The old man bowed low and walked out the open door into the fields and the mist and the mystery of the world beyond the farm. The road west. The sun had finally gained power over the darkness. His journey still seemed to be a childhood fantasy. Who was he to go off on a quest? He had turned the farm over to his faithful farmhands and walked away, following the directions of an old man he did not know, living in a world of boyhood dreams and fantasies. The dusty road wound through the meadows and forests and moved ever westward. The crisp, early winter air gave Arden extra energy and motivation to keep moving. The quest had begun, and Arden joined the mystery of the road west. Book 3. Those of Midnight. Book 3, Chapter 1. The Wizard's Apprentice. As a young lad, Million played in the dirty alleyways of the Zarmelis Market District. His parents, not paupers, still struggled to make a living, leaving Million, for the most part, to his own devices. He had always been a conscientious youth, caring for his parents and older brothers and sisters. He would rise early and set out the food and clothing for all his siblings before going about his assigned chores. Then, while others played, he would help his father and mother with the business of their market tent. His father would finally and firmly put a stop to his help, pushing the lad outdoors to play with his friends. Even here, he was helpful and kind. Never one for mischief, he would help others to learn games and do chores. At peace in his small world and the world around him, many felt this peace within themselves by his nearness. This youth ended early for the young lad when the king announced the conscription. Every 4 or 5 years, the king would gather up boys between 6 and 7 years old to be trained for the court. While announced as an honor, few of the lads ever attained any stature, with most thrown back out into the city streets when they reached the age of 12. Parents, therefore, looked to gain from this conscription in any way they could. Some of the nobles would pay favors for promising use, and even promised to teach their charges a trade while they performed the duties assigned to them. Others, wealthy enough, kept their children out altogether. Million's parents, not in the public eye, could not gain any influence in the dealings for their youngest son. They did not have the wealth necessary to keep him from the conscription. He followed the rest, his fate left to the heavens. Early spring and the marketplace filled with the usual bustle of business. This day the presentation of the new court squires would take place. Million, along with many others, was scrubbed clean and given a new set of clothing early in the morning. They were marched out into the main market square and lined up against the castle wall for display. Many of the nobles, unwilling to pay tokens to the parents, sorted through the lines of young men and made their selections. Of these, 2 nobles considered the worst for a young man's life spirit were Purion, the master of the jails, and Beldorion, the court wizard and advisor to the king. While Purion took pleasure in the free slave labor he received from the conscription, Beldorion just could not be bothered with the practice and typically gave his charges menial duties to keep them from underfoot. The king, however, insisted that Beldorion maintain his staff of young squires, and he wandered through the lines uninterested in the proceedings. Usually he would select his 3 charges from the last boys left. They would typically prove to be sickly or contain a spirit of rebellion. This day, early in the selection process, his eyes wandered across the quiet face of Million, and impulse, not his standard demeanor, made Beldorion signal for the boy to be set aside for him. The presenter looked sharply at Beldorion, and Million's parents wept bitter tears. Million stood in his quiet stance of acceptance and wondered who the gray older man was. When the day's events came to a close, Beldorion gathered up his new charges and marched them off to the north towers of the castle. He had forgotten his morning's curiosity and handled each of the lads as usual. He handed them over to his cook and was done with the whole deal for the next 4 to 5 years. Million, lean but strong, immediately gained the cook's tag of troublemaker due to his lack of infirmity and his experience with these lads. He went directly to complain to the wizard. He would not stand for another insolent youth in his kitchen, and he warned Beldorion to remove the boy or find another cook. Now this was a real predicament for Beldorion. His one fondness in life was food, and he had trained his cook over the years to prepare all his meals to his taste.
"Bring the boy to me, cook,"
Beldorion barked.
"Now, get back to your kitchen and leave me alone."
Today was not to be his day. The old wizard lamented to no one in particular. Why did he allow that silly habit of his to take hold so easily? After so many generations, he thought curiosity would have either left him or killed him. Now he had to find some work for this young one or go begging to the king to use him elsewhere. Million arrived and stood silently by the door to the wizard's study. His kind and loving parents had honed his manners, and his curiosity about life filled his mind, leaving no room for mischief. He looked around the room, cluttered with books, bottles, and boxes, a fairyland of delight for the boy to behold. Beldorion looked up from a tome on the early history of the elven kingdoms. Again, the curiosity struck him deeply. What was it about this boy?
"What is your name?"
The question meant to be direct and rough, intending to put this lad into his proper place quickly and regain some level of peace, came out softly and with great feeling. Who was this boy?
"I am called Million. I hope we can become good friends, sir. What are you called?"
Beldorion just stared back at the gentle child. Then the boy asked one more question.
"My parents are sad about my selection," Million spoke softly. "May I go tell them how wonderful this place is and how happy I am?"
Damn the dragon lords. A polite youth. Was he going to become a nursemaid in his golden years? Beldorion was not having a very good day. Fighting dragons would be better than this.
"You may speak to your parents the next time we enter the marketplace. Now sit in the corner by the fire and do not disturb me."
Beldorion pointed to a small stool next to the hearth and went back to his studies. Evening wore on, and, as is his custom, Beldorion lost himself in his studies. The midnight stars reached their peak when he closed the tome and stretched his tired muscles. Turning to the fireplace to bank the coals, he saw Million. The boy had sat quietly, watching the wizard for many hours, and, sometime during the night, fell asleep leaning against the hearth. The wizard studied the sleeping lad for a long time. Then, gently picking him up, he placed him on an old lounging chair and covered him with one of his cloaks. The mysteries of a gentle soul filled his mind and his heart. Beldorion knew something special about Million would be revealed to him. Going to the cot, he covered himself and fell into a restful sleep. Morning came bright and clear. Beldorion coughed, grumbled, and began to awaken his tired old bones. Running for the chamber pot, he came to a dead stop. Spinning around and around, he looked at his study. Not one book out of place or one piece of dust to be found. Indeed, he was not sure if all had been stolen during the night, or he had dreamed some enchantment of disappearance. There, by the hearth on the stool, sat Million, gently turning and touching the pages of an ancient text. Before Beldorian summoned up the proper curses, Million looked up at the wizard with a fire set deep in his eyes. "This book holds many feelings of power. I cannot read all the words, sir. Will you help me?" So that was it. The lad possessed power, and Beldorian at last would have his apprentice. He would finally be able to turn over the cares of the world to another and travel into the great beyond. His days of peace were finally near at hand. Book 4, The Midnight Wars. Book 4, Chapter 1, The Seventh Star. Winter took hold of the city of Zarmelis, with the work of the two wizards almost complete. 6 of the 7 had been approached in some manner and given the option of choosing their quest. If all went well, they would arrive in Zarmelis by midwinter and band together in a common quest against this evil scourge. The last of the 7, Kulgora, the dwarf lord of the Crystal Mountains, sauntered into Zarmelis. He had been a friend of the wizard for many years, his summoning a direct call from Beldorian. As requested, he brought with him 2 smiths who would help him with armaments and 3 leaders from his army to train the new legions of the gathered people. His response, although delivered with his usual grumbling, had been positive, and he journeyed out of the mountains to arrive in the city on the eve of wintertide. During his journey from his mountain home, he encountered many bands of trolls and ogres that would no longer defile the earth with their smell. This disturbed him because of their lack of fear and the bloodlust they seemed to possess. Upon arriving at Zarmelis, Kulgora went directly to the tower of the wizard and spoke at length about his encounters. Both knew that they were running short on time, and preparations needed to begin immediately. Beldorian set up quarters suitable to his dwarven guests, who began training men in the dwarven art of war. It would be another 2 weeks before all gathered, and Beldorian spent the time studying ancient texts. Belmillion took on a new task to enhance the winter. This manipulation of the seasons would give them more time to prepare for the siege on Zarmelis. Sure that the city of the Old Kingdom would be the first assault by the new evil, the delay of spring would help their final preparations. Belmillion was careful in his work and consulted with Beldorian frequently to ensure the proper actions and reactions were taken. Many would suffer from the severity of this winter, but it was necessary. Belmillion also had the task of taking the new king under his wing and convincing him of the need to defend the city. This was no easy effort, as the nephew of the late king did not take kindly to the meddling of wizards. King Renaud I filled his mind with power and greed and saw the wizards as a roadblock to his success. He would deal with this in due time. He had felt the contact in his mind from a great power that would bring him the wealth he deserved. He would follow this power and gain control of the whole kingdom on his own. Then all would bow down before his glory and pay tribute to his mighty rule. King Renaud I, filled with a vile possession, laughed at the puny attempts of the 2 wizards. He knew his power would overcome their meddling ways. The meeting of the 7 stars. All were now gathered within the city of Zarmelis and had shared their journeys. Beldorian called them all together on the last day of wintertide. He had set aside a room in the northern tower and had created powerful wards to protect their meeting from outside interference. He and Belmillion spent the week before preparing each for the tasks ahead. They each had to make a final decision. They each had to choose to become one of the stars of midnight. The morning of the last day of wintertide dawned clear and cold. Arden awoke and went to the fireplace to rekindle the dying ashes. His choice to stay, committed to in his mind, remained a source of nervousness as to the task he would be given. Dressing quickly in the cold, dark room, he went down to the tavern's main room and ate a meal of oatmeal and dark bread, then went directly to the North Tower and was the first to arrive at the meeting place. Strapped to his back, the Sword of Darkness remained covered by a cloak. It had become usual to wear the weapon, as it caused him distress when he put it down for even the briefest period. What he hoped for this morning was to turn the sword over to its proper owner and be done with it. Yet he was no longer sure he could let it go. Beldorion had remained silent to his questions about the sword. Today he would end this. Today he would know the fate of the dark weapon. Ulden and Fox, delayed by their need for food and partying the night before, arrived just as Beldorion and Belmillion entered the room from the back stairway. Both had become good friends, and while Ulden showed no signs of becoming a pickpocket, he certainly took well to the excitement of city life and the adventures of his fast-fingered friend. They joined others looking over some of the maps of the city. Quillon, Kulgora, and Effenron had spent the early morning hours riding through the western countryside of Zarmelis. Moonracer had returned unexpectedly, and Quillon's excitement was contagious. Kulgora did not enjoy equestrian activities, but he enjoyed the company of the two lords, and a bond had grown between the three and Tylon. They had spent the last few weeks in strategy sessions for the defense of the city, and they were getting to know and understand the attributes of each other. Tylon chose the dawn air for his exercise. Changing back into his eagle form, he flew into the gray darkness and soared across the sky. He needed to contact some of his people and to relay messages from Beldorion across the lands. The sun had cleared the eastern horizon before these four entered the North Tower and joined the meeting. Joab had been quiet for many days and had stayed alone except for her outings with Tibor. The two would walk out of the city and disappear into the fields and forests around the city for the entire day or even days at a time. Belmillion, concerned with her silence and pensive attitude, yielded to Beldorion and Quillon's counsel to let her be. She would come around when the time of choosing was at hand. She needed the solitude she found within her meditations, in her dance, and with her companion Tibor. None would worry about her safety during these trips out of the city, knowing the big cat traveled with her. When she walked into the room with Tibor at her side, they all took their places at the table. Tibor curled up at Joab's feet and purred. Joab's calm demeanor silently announced she was ready. Around the long table, the unique gathering in known history sat quietly awaiting their fate. Beldorion looked deep into the eyes of each. The 7 he had chosen sat before him. Fox and Tibor also sat, earning the right to join in the quest of the 7 stars of midnight. The quest. Beldorion had taken almost an hour just looking into the hearts of each of the 7. There was no impatience. Each knew the importance of this meeting and would await Beldorion's statements before reacting. Finally he stood, and waving his hand in the air to increase the fire within the fireplace, turned to the adventurers.
Each of you have been chosen to aid the powers of the earth. You now know of the evil within the world and in your countries. I will ask you to join together to fight this evil and return the balance of power to the earth. Many years I have served the needs of the good earth, but I cannot directly intervene in your world. I am but a servant for you to use in your quest. Belmillion has joined me in this service, and he will pledge his loyalty to you and the quest. Now is the time to let you know what it is you will face.
Beldorion's face turned hard and grim. His studies during the autumn had revealed to him the cause of this evil, and he knew what he would tell these adventurers would destroy any hope they would have. Each wanted to help their countries and each other. Now they would realize their chances in this quest.
Long ago, in the times of your ancestors, there was a battle between the Dragon Lords and your forefathers. I was there and aided in this victory over those evil creatures. Indeed, many mistakes were made. My youth and knowledge of the earth did not let me understand everything that was taking place. When the Dragon Lord Wars were over, we accepted that victory was ours, and we had won over the evil within the world. Indeed, many years have passed, and this belief has held. Now I feel the same evil as years before, only this time it is more powerful and more direct. I now know that the Dragon Lords were a creation of this evil, and the Dragon Lord Wars did not destroy it. We must now choose to find this power of darkness and end it, or live long enough to see the end of our world.
They all sat, stunned at the enormity of the task. Who were these 7 to go against an evil greater than the Dragon Lords? And how would they even attempt? Belmillion sat, staring at his mentor in silence. He knew the powers of the earth and saw that Beldorian found a force that seemed to be greater. Tibor acted first. The great cat stood and stretched his back lazily. Then, looking into the eyes of his friend, he growled, low and long. Jawab stood and, stroking the cat's black coat, turned to the others within the room.
The power is within the earth, and I choose to obey its needs. I will join in the quest.
This simple statement, befitting the Lady of the Seas, took no one by surprise. All knew of her desire to go back to her peaceful life of contemplation. All understood the vow she made before them. She would commit her life to the quest, and she would not turn back no matter what the odds. She would not run from the world's pain, and she would do all to protect her people. One by one, the 7 chose their destiny. Each accepted the task beyond understanding, and none turned away. They would stand for the earth and fight to the death to protect its goodness. They became that morning the 7 stars of midnight. They became the one force that stood in the path of the total destruction of their world. Tibor listened intently to each, and being satisfied, he curled up again at the feet of Jawab and went back to sleep. A sigh escaped the old wizard as he watched their display of faith and fate. Up to this point, he had been playing with the events of history. Now he had asked those of the world to take up a deadly and impossible quest for the sake of the earth. His pride in these people of all the races, overshadowed by the sorrow he felt for the risk they must assume, made him tremble. Belmillion broke the silence by volunteering to prepare for the defense of the city. That would be their first responsibility, and there was a lot of work to do before the onset of spring. Pulling out a map of the known world, he asked all to come together and help with the plans. Each awoke from their thoughts and began to prepare for battle quietly.